Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm excited to share this conversation that I had with Sean Dembrosky back in February. There's a bit of a delay in finalizing this video, and I'm actually glad for that delay because it's given me a chance to re-record this introduction, kind of frame this conversation in light of some of the challenges that we're going to be moving into in this sort of new economic reality that we're facing. Over the past couple days, the Dow Jones Industrial Average has fallen over 1,400 points per day. It's actually down 1,800 points as I'm recording this. And, you know, basically the stock market is reflecting that we're moving into a very, very different economic and political reality. I suspect that the world we're moving into will be significantly more challenging than the world that we leave behind. And, I think many people may feel super nervous about this new reality that we're moving into. Rightly so. One of the reasons that I'm really eager to share this video is because a lot of this conversation focuses on resilience. Building resilience has set my mind at ease to some extent because we have a pasture full of goats and sheep. We have 4 freezers full of meat. We have a productive garden. We heat our home with a wood stove. We just get the wood free off of Craigslist. I would wish this sort of peace of mind on everyone. And Sean's work is really exemplary in exploring resilience from many different angles, whether it's gardening, food preservation, health and wellness, commerce, energy. And even though we're moving into difficult times ahead, I think this conversation with Sean provides some great insights on resilience, and they're grounded in Sean's very practical lived experience working on his operation. I don't want to take up too much more time. You guys came here to see Sean, not me. But just one last little comment. When I requested this consultation hour from Sean, he was generous to let me just ask whatever questions I wanted to ask. He didn't filter them in any way. He didn't preview the questions in any way. And he just sat down and was willing to kind of speak his mind on some of these, at times, challenging and provocative questions. Thank you to Sean for joining me in this conversation. And thank you for the insights that you provide through your very thoughtful responses.
Hello.
Hey, good afternoon.
Good evening.
Yeah.
Good
All
day
right.
to you. Hi. Howdy. But hopefully what I can offer, I'm not sure. I'm interested to see what you're going to ask of me. But
Right,
I'm really
right.
open to seeing how it unfolds. So wonderful. Well, Brian, how
Yeah.
can I be helpful to you?
Yeah. Well, goodness. Well, okay, so I prepared some slides. I was doing some research, and I pulled up some articles from years ago. One was on Ithaca.com, and they talked about your what is it, graphic design background.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
And
yeah,
so
that's the deep dive right there.
yeah, well, that article's actually going to come up in the slides. But yeah, I spent hours on the graphic design of my slides, which I know your sense of humor. You'll know exactly what I mean. But let me go ahead and pull up the slides
Mhm.
so you can see the slides, I presume.
Yes, chat with Sean Dombrowski.
That's right. All right. So yeah, just wanted to start since I will be posting this on my channel. I believe that was the agreement.
Sure, happy to have that.
Cool. Yeah. Um, I was thinking that most people who watch my channel probably already know who you are. And then I got thinking that, I've got some videos that are kind of come in at different angles than the traditional permaculture types of content. So maybe there's some people out there that don't know who you are. So I thought we might start there.
Sure. Yeah, well, my name is Sean Dombrowski. I run Edible Acres along with my wife and our friend Juan and our little daughter Zelda, which is a permaculture nursery. Edibleacres.org is where we are, and have a YouTube channel as well. I've been doing for about 15 years now, since 2010, where we specialize in hardy, easy to propagate perennial food and medicine plants as our primary focus, but then also spend a lot of time and energy experimenting and researching forest farm ideas and um, like food forest guilds and relationships and permaculture principles all the way around. A lot of hand tools and small scale like rainwater collection and small hand dug ponds, that kind of stuff. So really human centered, earth centered, small footprint kind of work, with our nursery being our primary way of making our living and the YouTube channel being a distant second, but still part of our whole livelihood picture.
Very cool. Yeah. So um, basically, my interest in setting up this chat with you, Sean, is actually, it kind of centers around the stuff that you've done on YouTube. But a lot of what I want to chat with you about today is actually the things that have kind of, some of it has gone left unsaid, other things you've kind of hinted at, and it's things that you kind of left an itch that I wanted to scratch and kind of wanted to dig a little bit deeper.
Okay.
The slides that I have, they start kind of hot and heavy. The whole talk's not going to be quite this intense, but I did have some kind of itching things that I wanted to chat with you about.
Okay.
Like I said, it'll seem a little bit hot and heavy at first. But several months back, I read Mark Krawczyk's book, Coppice Agroforestry,
Sure.
Coppice Agroforestry, Tending Trees for Product, Profit, and Woodland Ecology. And really great book. I've also read Steve Gabriel's book. I assume you know Steve?
Yeah. Yeah. We've been friends
Yeah.
for almost 20 years now.
Okay. Yeah, I've read his book cover to cover. So I'm very much, being in California, it's very hard because our Mediterranean summers, our rain stops in April. And even the rain in April is basically a couple of showers here and there.
Mm.
And then
Mhm.
we don't see any significant rain until late November. And so
Wow.
trying to grow trees in this climate is surprisingly difficult. So there's lots of sort of like drought tolerant, Mediterranean adapted species, but they're not the most like human centric types of species, right? It's like instead of hickory, you can grow coast live oak or whatever. And it's like they're adapted. But the Native Americans from this area, of course, they knew how to work with acorns and all this stuff, but they're not really like a modern staple, so it's a bit of trying to, put a square peg in a round hole, right? But that really is where my heart lies, is forestry systems. And so really, really great books, both Steve's book and Mark's book. What's interesting about Mark's book is that there was kind of this undercurrent in his book. Um, if I had to summarize it in my own words, and I'm sure he would maybe nitpick at this a little bit, um, it's kind of like the world will regress and we need to prepare, right? And just a couple of quotes. So from the introduction, Dave Jackie wrote the introduction to his book. We are sleep running, not sleepwalking, but sleep running through an inflection point where humanity's continued reliance on ancient hydrocarbons will destroy us and everything we hold dear. We must rapidly create economies, cultures, lifestyle, and landscapes based largely upon recent carbohydrates, if many of us are to survive, much less thrive. And then Mark, in his direct words, considering the pivotal role that coppice played in the stabilization and expansion of many cultures in the face of extensive resource depletion, it would also seem an appropriate response to many of the same problems in our modern world. So hold that in the back of your mind for a moment.
Mhm.
I also rewatched a video by Toby Hemingway. It was disappointing. I'll say that. So that the first time I heard this video is from Permaculture Voices 1, and it was a video of him talking about sort of like the modern energy transition that we're going through with peak oil and things like that. And I heard it years ago, and I kind of filed it away in the back of my mind. Listened to it again, I was pretty disappointed with the numbers. They were very, very sloppy. But some of the ideas, at least, I think are worth thinking about. So he talks about energy return on energy invested, where he said, ideally we would have at least 10-to-1 energy return for every unit of energy invested for many of the niceties that we see in modern society, healthcare, financial sector, things like that. He talked about peak oil and how as the infrastructure of the world gets built up, we're we've been ascending the peak of peak oil, but as we build out infrastructure going into the future, we've got this giant industrial overhang, which means that the backside of the oil supply curve, we're going to go down that oil supply curve much faster than what we went up, right? Um,
Mhm.
and he talks about how renewable energy has a much lower return on energy invested than oil. And he also talked about how minerals will become harder and harder to mine. So copper, lithium, cobalt, all those minerals follow that same sort of supply curve where, you know, we're extracting more and more, and we find easier supplies first, but then as the industrial sort of overhang, um, as the industrial base gets built out and we start depleting those resources, we're going to go down that peak much faster. And I mentioned that Ithaca.com article, and it mentions in this article, it says, a chance meeting with John Nahr, a British World War II photographer, however, became a turning point in Sean's trajectory. Nahr urged Sean to consider how essential the ability to survive on one's own skills might become as the world's population increased exponentially and fuel supplies were depleted. Spending a year talking with and learning from John Nahr, Sean gathered invaluable information, how people had survived in the past and what one might need to know to survive in the future. And so basically where I'm going with this question is, you've probably heard that term intersectionality before, right? And it's kind of seems like a big buzzword, and you know, I think it really fits here. I'm interested in your take on the intersectionality between, gardening, resiliency, and the existing social challenges that we're facing, resource depletion, but also, social pressures, hyper-consumerism, all, it's just the many different social challenges that we're facing right now. It appears to me, and again, this is sort of like what I was saying, where your videos leave a lot of itches left to be scratched. It seems to me that the way you think about gardening is that it really does intersect with a lot of these different sort of facets of our existence in the world as we know it.
Yeah, I mean, a significant driver, as the quote on this slide shows, living with that fellow and just being exposed to the idea of like the fragility of the system that we're in, kind of innately feeling that and or sensing that with things back that was like in my early 20s or so. I'm 44 now, so it's been a while, but that really started to plant the seed psychologically for me of like, okay, I am in a inherently fragile system that not only is really fragile, but also is only it's only kept from being broken fragility wise through violence through for the most part. Like there's a presupposition of a lot of aggression and extraction and violence that the system requires in order to keep things from falling apart, it seems. And there's like an inflection point there of like, okay, that's an ugly, dangerous idea. Do I actively commit my life force to aggressively fighting that system and trying to dismantle that? Or do I see what it looks like to very actively shift as much as possible what my life looks like to decouple from being dependent on it first, but then also helping other people uh, pull out from that system? And so I think there's like maybe it's not so subtle, I don't know, but like in the 15 years or so of making the videos, it's like over 1,000 videos or so. There's within each video, um, there's an energetic that I'm trying to get along of like, here's this idea of growing more food or medicine or more carbon or what have you by buying nothing or making it yourself or finding this or building a relationship with a neighbor or accessing the waste stream, which to me is like deeper than buying nothing. It's finding somebody else's bought and discarded and converting it into something feels like even a higher ethical level than doing nothing at all. And having it be this kind of like gentle drumbeat, like make it pleasant and make it feel like demonstrate the abundance and the sweetness of the system and have that be the feeling, the takeaway that people have, along with a little bit of equipment on how to access that. rather than leading with like, it's all going to come to an end, and can you believe what they're doing in Washington, and this is how you're going to survive, which there's ample amount of that content for people if that's what they want. So like, how do I convey creating more resilience and decoupling from a capitalist system, and do it in a soothing way so that people feel really relaxed and can take the message in a better way, and then maybe feel empowered to act on it because they're calmer taking that in. Like, I feel better when I can generate my own calmness when I'm doing my work. So you wouldn't see in publication quotes like what you see from Dave Jackie and Mark Krawczyk, and like, that's fine. Like, I want to see that stuff out there, it's important, but I also want to be like quiet about what to do with that, when people get to that place of awareness where, okay, so now what do you do with that, and how do you do it in a gentle way? If I hope that addresses that question.
It does, yeah. And I do think it's interesting, right? Because on the one hand, as you've highlighted, uh, the Toby Hemingway quotes and the Dave Jackie and the Mark Krawczyk, they discuss the problem, and your channel is very much about solutions. And I like how you call it a steady drumbeat, because every one of your videos really is a solution to something, right? You don't just do content to produce content.
Right.
Every single video is, I've learned this clever trick, or I've redesigned this system, or I've, been tinkering with this experiment or whatever. And it's a nice kind of reminder that in addition to realizing that there's problems, there's sort of the other half of that, which is, now what are the solutions? I think Mark's book does a great job with that. His book was absolutely fantastic. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you've read it, but the history, and I actually have a slide about this, so I won't go too far into it, but the history of coppice agroforestry is quite compelling. And I'm glad that he and others are working to revive it, because I really do think that we've seen some dislocation there, that we've lost out on a lot of sort of like woody perennial culture because of this dislocation. So I really love the idea of bringing it back. And so again, he's sort of like providing that solution to say, yeah, things are going to be more scarce, and yeah, things are going to be more tense, and yeah, things are going to be have to become more localized. So what do we do about it?
Yeah.
Very cool.
But there's something really innately sweet within coppice as a modality of woodland management, that like, once you set good coppice regimes in motion, they remain in the realm of small, very small scale hand tool. You don't, a chainsaw can break and go away, and you can have a bow saw with a bunch of blades and like a nice sharp bill hook, and maintain that livelihood in perpetuity without even electricity. It's just like it's a perfect energy descent method of tree management, I think, rather than like, how do we get a saw log that one day we can sell for $3,000, and a diesel truck will move it away and bring it to a sawmill and then send it somewhere else. It's like everything, it's more intimate and more, it's actually like very sustainable. So it's a coppicing is something I really enjoy. I do a lot more pollarding because we just have so much immense deer browse that I need to make those cuts higher to keep the regrowth above that browse line. But tons of respect for the depth of work that they've, especially Mark in particular, has done around the coppice stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what I think is interesting is that it's very, I mean, you kind of hinted at this as well, very human scale, right? So I actually just contacted a guy yesterday from Craigslist. He's got a bunch of eucalyptus logs he's trying to get rid of. And he's like, okay, how wide can you take them? I said, oh, no more than 3 feet. How wide do you have them? He said, oh, up to like 8 feet. And it's like, once you get into that scale, that you can't do anything by hand. You need equipment,
Right.
you need machinery. Yeah,
Yeah.
very
That's
cool.
great.
And any last minute thoughts on this slide, or?
No, I'm happy to move forward. Yep.
Cool. Yeah, the next slide's kind of related. So these are kind of like one big question. So you don't need to answer each of these questions individually. How much do you see yourself as continuing a tradition of woody polyculture that already exists? And how much do you see yourself as actually just creating or kind of rediscovering new systems different from what has come before? And is there anything that you intentionally break from? So actually, we kind of hinted at this, right? The sort of like machine scale, maybe, fossil fuel driven type of thing. Is there anything that you break with tradition on? Or is there any traditions that you really adhere to, like something you really respect? And again, kind of like thinking intersectionality, uh, thinking through the lens of intersectionality on all these different questions.
I don't, I think what I should say first and foremost is I don't think I'm versed deeply enough in what the traditions of what were the first people. It's something I think to myself, oh, I really ought to do this in a more deep way. Like the folks that were like, there's the Gaekono folks that were in our particular region, where like the first people that were in this landscape and were clearly very interested in black walnut and hickory in particular, but all sorts of other things. Like what was their woodland management of the place I live in? Like right now I'm in the Finger Lakes area of New York State, and how was that managed before? And I feel like I'm woefully undereducated around that, and that so I don't know that I have something to speak to. And I also, it's like I'm from European descent. Like my last name is Dembrosky, which I think in the region of Poland where that name would have come from, it would have been Dubrawski, which is the people of the oaks. And so like I come from a line of people that were woodland dwellers or did management with trees, it seems like way back when. But I don't know much about that either. And I think there's a theme within me, for better or worse, but just to be honest and frank about it, that tend to I don't tend to educate myself in an explicit way that well. Like I don't sit with books and focus and learn. Um, it's almost embarrassing to say, but it's just the reality. It's whatever, because there are other people that are like that too. My attention span's hard. It's hard for me to sit and really focus that way. Um, I can focus immensely in the work that I'm actively doing. And, I pick little bits here or there. Like I met with Dave Jackie in 2007 and took a weekend long course about food forest design. And that was enough to spark the interest. And I have edible forest gardens, and I skimmed it enough to get some ideas about the idea of these plant relationships and what they could look like. And then the rest of it's been hands-on for 15, 18 years or so of that work, with more or less all of my education coming directly from the plants in the landscape. I think most of the tradition that I would refer to as like the hedgerows that are unmanaged, and like what happens in these like semi, if not fully feral regimes on the boundaries of open field, and like what sort of patterns and mimicry can happen from that. And I tend to actually plant in a way that's probably way more feral and dense and diverse, and therefore harder to manage, a little bit less quote unquote functional, productive, but very, very high resilience, than I would suspect most traditional woody agroforestry systems would look like. So I'm mimicking more like bird and squirrel farming practices than human practices in a lot of ways. And I think it works for me. Like I feel comfortable being within reason, surrounded by just like food from all sides, and it's hard to know what to do with it, and you just kind of push your way through and eat. Um, so I don't know that that's not me being in any way, shape, or form saying I'm very deeply aware of past traditions and I reject them either. It's just
Mhm.
they're not, it doesn't come into my mind as like I need to know how people did it before in order to feel comfortable doing it now. Um, I will say, like, within coppice management regimes, I read Ben, I'm pulling up, why am I pulling? Ben Law, of course, who is an amazing builder in England, who does coppice management and does tons of round pole building. And that's something that has been really compelling to me, is learning to build small scale structures with round pole, stems, learning to peel them and then manage those trees. And so I've set in motion a bunch of black locust and hazelnut stands with the intention of it being our building material for the future, with round pole and hand tools. So there's compelling little like tidbits that I pick up on, like little whispers and seeds, and then I digest them and they turn into whatever they turn into inside of me.
Mhm. Yeah, when I wrote this slide, I actually kind of figured that's what the answer would be.
Mm,
Um, and like I said, this whole dialogue that we're having is really me getting to kind of like ask these sort of nagging questions that I've always had. And
mm.
that's kind of what I've always, the sense that I've always gotten is that you're out there and you're just doing things and you're learning as you go. But at the same time, you also did have, little bits of discussion, like pollarding, coppicing, things like that, that you've sprinkled in enough to where it's like, okay, is he following some tradition? Has he inherited certain management strategies, or is he? And that's the sense that I got, was that you're kind of taking little nuggets and you're putting your own twist on them and what have you, but that you're not necessarily out there, you know, doing deep research and spending hours in the library and that sort of thing, which is really, I think, charming and compelling, actually, because it really just makes the channel seem like Sean's brain. Like
Mm.
we're getting to see Sean's brain, and it's just like that sort of like creativity and like playful experimentation and exploration and everything. It has a certain charm.
I think, oh, that's sweet, and thank you. I think it there's a little bit of an intentionality at this point in continuing on in that way, because um, for me, when I come across someone who's sharing ideas and it feels like they're generating them themselves, that they have some awareness, they're trying to do things in like a way that's respectful and safe, and like the basic parameters of goodness are met, but they're not like speaking from a very elevated education space, or like, after reading this and this, now I can tell you how to do it. I find myself feeling like an ease, it's a lubricated entry into understanding what they're up to, and like feeling like, oh, they're talking through their process, they're just winging it, they're figuring it out as they go along. I could probably do that too, I guess. And I don't feel that way when I like get the sense, and I respect it, and it's amazing when people are extremely thoroughly educated in a subject and they can speak very strongly to it. That's cool, but it makes it feel like, okay, well, I can appreciate what you're up to, but that's not going to be me. Like, I'm not going to learn enough to get that good. I'm not going to be that smart about a subject. And so I kind of like bow out from getting involved in it. So staying a little bit more like, empirical and going for it and poking at it and speaking to it as you go, I'm hoping brings more people along to try it too. Like, okay, this dude has no education in that realm, he's just winging it, I bet I could do it too. That's the point.
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know
Yeah, yeah, nice, nice. Yeah, I'll tell you. Uh, I watched YouTube, you know, um, many years before I started posting any videos, and my wife would always tell me like, you should post videos.
Hmm.
Like you're always watching all this gardening stuff. You should post videos of your gardening stuff. And I was like, I don't know, the editing and this and that. And actually, the video that like kind of really convinced me that like, okay, maybe this might actually be worth my time. It was one of your videos, and you were growing mushrooms in a bathtub.
Nice. Yep.
And it's just like that video kind of convinced me that the audience was there, that people actually care about this stuff. Like, here's a guy growing mushrooms in his bathtub and people are eating it up. So the bar was kind of lowered, right? It's like, just show your projects, like lowered in a good way, right?
Oh yeah,
And,
why not?
and yeah. And so it's just like, just go show your projects and show people what you're up
Yeah.
to. And if they like it, they like it. And if not, then whatever. And so that was actually, yeah, kind of like, all right, whatever, I'll just do it. So
People can always click away from a video, and they can also say thanks but no thanks to you sharing a concept. And there's like a little bit of ego work to just be like, okay, I'm doing the thing I'm doing, I'd love to share it. I don't feel like I'm amazing, I figured it out, check it, this is exactly how you do it, guys. Like, no, this is where I am in my process. And I think the spirit of that is, it would be a healthier space, especially for dudes in particular. There are a lot of YouTube videos that start with like, hey guys, let me show you how to do this. I'm going to like top down give you this information on what to do. And demonstrating a flatter thing. Like, I'm in this, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Where are you in this process? Tell me what I'm doing wrong, bring me up too. Then it just puts us all in a community of equals rather than like the guru like we're all just figuring stuff out. And
Mhm.
when you put yourself up there, then you get a lot more comments of like, this sucks or you're wrong and blah blah blah, and there's just more antagonism, and it just doesn't feel good for anybody. So
Mhm.
just stay hierarchy free is kind of like the way to go whenever it's possible.
Mhm. Nice, nice. All right. Yeah, so it's no secret that a lot of your work is perennial centric, which I think is great. Um, and I've followed Mark Shepard for a long time. My first exposure to permaculture was back in 2010. And my roommate at the time told me about Masanobu Fukuoka's One Straw Revolution. And so I read that book, and he and I put our very first garden together. We asked our landlord if we could use some of her garden space. She had like these little, ornamental garden spaces. We said, "Hey, Cheryl, can we, plant some little plants in there?" She said, "No." And so we said, okay. So we went to Home Depot and got some wood and just built our own little garden bed, just stuck it out and got some soil from down in a riverbed and just started growing beans and stuff like that.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, he and I just kind of nerded out on that book, The One Straw Revolution. And so way back in like 2012, 2013, I was clicking around on some videos, some Fukuoka videos, and Mark Shepard video showed up in my feed. And he's pretty bombastic and pretty opinionated and everything. So it was I had mixed feelings after watching the video, but it was actually very intriguing, right? And real like I wanted to know more. Um, as I've sort of like come to understand Mark Shepard's style, his working with perennials is very much agenda driven, right? Of instead of destroying an ecosystem to plant your annual seeds, why don't we just work with perennials so we don't have to continually till, we don't have to buy a bunch of seed every year, we don't have to fertilize. Um, in your work with perennials, do you have any sort of agenda in that way, or are these just the plants that speak to you, or do you just not like buying seed, or like what motivates your interest in perennials?
When you say perennial, you're in this case, you're referring more to like herbaceous perennials over herbaceous annuals. Is that that's
Not necessarily herbaceous, woody or herbaceous.
okay? I mean, they're easier. So, there's that. Like that's, I mean, I could just stop right there. Like it is easier to grow perennials than it is annuals. And I'm now coming full circle and trying to get better as an annual crop farmer just to understand it. Like I really want to understand growing hot peppers at scale and like doing tomato production and like really dialing in getting cabbages right, like all this stuff that people are like, oh well, they start with their annual garden and then they become perennial gardeners. And I just see a lot of value in all of it. The most resilience lies in like all of the things as much as you can handle it. Because we've had years where with the woody aspect where we had a very warm spring and then a punishingly late frost mid late May that zapped more or less every tree, like 80% plus of the fruit and nuts that we were hoping for in a season were gone because of that 2 nights in mid-May. But the beans and the squash that were started a week later could care less, and that's what coasted us through the season. So um, I I find myself in any given situation wanting to establish a really solid backbone skeletal system of woody perennials in most places, with herbaceous perennials, small divisions of herbaceous perennials dotted throughout all that, and then leveraging as much as possible annuals to fill in all the gaps for the first year or two. And to the best of my understanding, that's relatively decently close to natural successional ecosystem mimicry of, disturbance regime, aka me, opened stuff up, kind of created the successional flatline. And the the error in my mind is every year saying it's going to be annual, annual, annual over and over again. To me, it's like, okay, we'll set it in motion. maybe it's the first year is potatoes. Like I've documented extensively breaking ground where it's weedy, like sod, for example. If it's sod, I'm not going to be able to just put in sea kale and good King Henry direct sown into the sod, and perennials will start to take over. So I leverage something like a potato to break the soil, the garlic to fumigate and clean the soil, and then annuals for a little bit, and then segue it into perennial systems that are going to be there for the long run. Um, I find our diet, interestingly, a lot of the stuff we eat is annual crops. Like we eat a significant amount of potatoes in the winter. We have sauerkraut, which is cabbage based. We don't really do sauerkrauts out of like good King Henry and Turkish rocket florets. But like early in the spring, the sorrel and the chives and the stinging nettles are phenomenally valuable to us as spring greens, and so we continually expand where they are in the landscape. um, and it's, yeah, certainly wouldn't append the sentiment of an agenda in my mind. It's more like every year feels like rolling a giant 3,000 sided die. It's like an almost perfectly circular thing of like what, and you just keep rolling it and you don't know what you're going to get. Is it going to be profoundly hot? Is it going to be cold and wet? Our climate is just like so wild here. And to the best of my, like, the whatever's the upper limit of my capacity to tolerate the most annuals plus the most perennials, plant more trees, plant more herbaceous perennials, cast seeds, transplant things in succession. So the more likely it is that we get to eat like beautiful meals for 11 months out of the year from our own landscape.
Mhm.
And that the perennial aspect should represent an energy descent on my part as far as maintain, like it'll be less and less diverse over time. It'll settle into, but it's still pretty diverse, but it'll settle into something where it's just an automatic, there's food, there's medicine, now go get it. And then we can decide where we want to pioneer and open up, maybe that's a weird word to use, but to set in motion new successional arcs in otherwise mowed areas or disturbed areas, that annuals will do the work to help us do that.
Interesting. Yeah, fascinating. And so you speak on your channel about, supporting other small scale nurseries and human scale enterprises, things like that. And so do you picture that the systems that you are creating, do you picture that these are going to scale in some way, or is this very much like Sean doing Sean's thing? Like, do you picture many different people all kind of creating their own successional arcs and sort of creating these systems in their own sort of ecological niches? Or do you picture that these things could actually scale up in some sort of commercial way?
I don't know if care. I guess I'm not interested in, um, gosh, I hope some huge like corporate backed venture takes an interest in what I'm up to and tries to figure out how to mimic our system on like a 300-acre parcel that is so organized and clean that predominantly one or two people with machines can maintain it. Like, that doesn't do much for me at all. I'm actually like counter that. Like I appreciate when people demonstrate, like Mark Shepard demonstrating, like taking a cornfield and converting it into a tree system. But when the trees tend to represent a kind of a monocultural pattern, it's less compelling to me. Um, I the idea of older school thing of like the commons where like people within walking distance would collectively farm an area and like they make decisions about how it's going to look and go, like our, that's very exciting and interesting to me. I don't know if that constitutes a scaling, but like I imagine a system where there's a handful of acres where one person or family or group is involved in establishing the tree layer. There are people that are interested in grazing animals. Is it sheep or cows for milk and meat and wool and all that? And there are people that are interested in the chickens that follow that. And there's a north facing hillside in that space. And so somebody's doing medicinal and culinary mushrooms. and firewood production, and there's a collective that's working with that land in an intimate way, and maybe sharing common housing in the coldest parts of winter and having like small housing for individual people. Like that's the scale I'd be interested in seeing. And I think out of this, in a future where there's societal and structural and systemic turbulence and energy, deep energy disruption, the kind of systems I work with right now are the ones that just would naturally be buoyant and percolate up. That there's like diversity, there's complexity, you kind of do it by hand. There's not really a layout where a tractor can come through because there's no tractors anymore, or it's diesel's $26 a gallon. So, okay, we're going to do this by hand now, kind of thing. I kind of feel like these sorts, the systems that I work with would tend to win out, as far as like profit, blah, 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 but just like caloric density and food and medicine for the people that are in that space. It's a lot. Like you get a lot of food out of this style of farming. And it requires a lot of people rather than small number of people with high skill, high machine access, which the scaled systems tend to favor that. Less people, more machine. I don't care for that generally. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, maybe they're really like amazing, sea kale farms that people can run, or like sea berry farms that work really well. But if it's just one crop, or if it's under 5 crops as the primary growth part of the system, it doesn't draw me in as something that feels exciting or feels actually that resilient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fascinating. And I think that kind of answers the last question as well. Do you view this as an imperative or a way to improve our lives in an incremental way? It kind of sounds like you always kind of have an eye on the future of saying, like, we know the future we're moving into, and we need to be realistic about that. And this is a system, like you've described, that is buoyant against those forces, right?
Yeah, it's both incremental and like it needs to be. Well, this is why I'm trying to do the work the way I do it, where it's like we offer up these videos where it's compelling and it's sweet and it feels like, oh, that seems relaxing and pleasurable and rewarding and tasty and abundant and it's beautiful. And then I want to start incrementally adding that into my system. But I feel like that gets people more buy-in than the imperative. Like if you don't plant these 7 hazelnuts this year, your kids are going to die. Like it, maybe it's, I don't know what's true, but I think if people are excited to get the systems going, then when it is imperative, the foundational bits are there, the capacity, the competence to do basic propagation and expansion work is there, the competence of like understanding pattern language and plant relationships and plant identification and uses are all there. And then that can be scaled in the human realm, in the like, small number of people that are intimately occupying a space and making it work. So the imperative can follow the incremental and not have it be a heavy hitting thing of like imminent collapse, you must do this now kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. What was kind of coming to me as you're going through that is that your systems aren't so much systems, it's really a lifestyle, right? And it's interesting that so many of us are on the sort of like hamster wheel of modern society, right? And you miss out on so much, right? You miss out on your kids growing up. You miss out on the delight of watching your seeds germinate and see sunlight for the first time. You miss the delight of having friends over on a Tuesday afternoon to hang out and drink some beers and barbecue some asparagus or whatever. And it's it's quite a compelling like counterpoint to the whole hamster wheel society that so many of us inhabit, right? Of saying like, what if your time wasn't spent on the hamster wheel and it was spent, you're providing substance for yourself. So there's a ton of work that goes into it. It's hard work. But at the same time, it's work that you can enjoy. It's work that you can become invested in. And just kind of providing that alternative framework not just for food systems, but as a lifestyle, right?
Yeah, I think having the lifestyle be something where it's less about how, here's how to start a nursery for profit. I mean, I share notes on like, this is how we develop our nursery, and this is what it looks like. And if you want to start a small scale nursery, we encourage it, that kind of thing. But more like, what does it look like to, with the homesteading vibes, like learning more about annual crop growing, learning more about perennial plant propagation, learning more about working with animals in a system, maybe building each of those skills in a small way. They dovetail into each other. They're mutually supportive. They're all kind of necessary to have a thing work, and they all hold within them the opportunity to start feeling out. Let's say you're doing concurrently a job you don't really love and you want to find your way out, rather than like all in right off the bat, I'm just going to become this nursery, or I'm going to raise chickens for eggs. You've got enough little irons in the fire that you can figure out which one you, the Venn diagram of like affinity and like innate skill, and there's a market where you are, and you can start turning that knob up, not to trash all the other aspects. You keep all those things going, maybe they dim a little, and you really prioritize, like, I really like mushroom production, so I'm going to start doing that more, and I'm going to intersect that with maple syrup production and maybe do biochar with that. And it's like, um as it's like many opportunities, small opportunity lifestyle activities that's baked within it, the opportunity that some of them could become the buoyant thing that acts as the financial direction someone could pursue, if that makes any sense. Because we still are in a place where it's like you need to have an income, and you can't
Mm-hmm.
like, all right, well, a, I've been a tax preparer and I make 80,000 a year. I'm going to just quit right now and I'm going to do something agricultural and replace my income. Is like, that doesn't work. So,
Yeah.
how do you like phase one out and phase the other up? And having it be diverse feels like it holds the most options that way.
Mm-hmm. And just for the record, I very much think of myself as one of those hamster wheel people, and kind of like what you're describing, I do have my little enterprises that I have going on while still on that hamster wheel, right? And so I know that sort of like dynamic from my own personal experience.
Well, what I said, does that resonate with you as like a way like that? Are you thinking of how can you segue away from that job and do something that's more on your land, or you're comfortable with the work that you do and you like?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with what I do. I'm a teacher in my day job, and so
Oh,
it's very much a mission-driven occupation, right? You generally go into teaching not so much for the money, but because you have an interest in teaching. So that's very much my story. What I have learned about myself though is that I used to picture that I would just never really retire. I used to think like I enjoy my job, I enjoy my career. Why would you retire if you enjoy what you're doing? And the realization that I've come to over the past several years, especially since I've been farming, has been there's lots of other things you could do. And so you don't have to do 45 years as a teacher. You could transition into something else. And my wife and I are both pretty financially uh, mindful. And so it very much is something where 10 years down the line, if I just want to quit my teaching job and transition into full-time nursery work or full-time, you know, worm production or, something along those lines,
mhm.
um, that's a choice that I can make. And so I'm very intentional about that, of like setting myself up to be able to make that decision longer term. But yeah, I'm even though I do think of myself as on that hamster wheel, I'm setting my life up to have off ramps basically, and they are very much all like farming related off ramps that I'm kind of developing.
Well, I think there's something to say to that around as well. Like, being a teacher is not, there's nothing that is in opposition to doing farming work. That like there, it could be that as you're developing your skills, you're developing your farm, that the segue is less of like, once you're ready to be no longer a teacher, it's then agricultural. It's, what does it look like to slowly segue the teaching? Maybe it's you're part-time with the formalized teaching, and you're doing part-time education around the agricultural systems you're doing. It's maybe it's really informal workshops, maybe it's an online course. Like there's all this neat opportunity. Like I was a teacher in my early 20s, I taught computer graphics and graphic design stuff for a little bit. And I think some of my propensity towards making the YouTube videos and sharing them and doing workshops and trying to be like open about what I'm up to flows from like, hey, teaching is a really compelling and rewarding activity. And it is compatible with like teaching what you're up to now, you know. And I think there's a sweetness within that of like, if your strength is mathematics or engineering, and like, okay, great, then you can slowly integrate that. Maybe you're helping to like design these really amazing systems for people, or you're like figuring out the financial picture for a farm to make sure it's like can stay afloat for people, or you like writing and farming, and so you start entering into grant proposal. Like there's just
Mm.
ways that like the things that we do for our living outside of farming can, it's not, they're not inherently in opposition to doing the farming. Like even you work at Target selling stuff, like okay, maybe that gives you the ability to interface with customers at a farmer's market later on if that's what you end up doing. It's like it's cool to think that it's not you do a thing until finally you can farm. It's like you do the thing and then it like it's you in the farming doing that, you know.
Right, yeah. And the many, it can morph into many other things over time, and it still sort of like maintain that thread, so to speak, of
Mhm.
this is who I am, and that thread runs through my work basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna skip this one. There's some better things. This one I kind of have a sense of what you'd say here. I think we'll skip this one unless you have anything really that you're just itching to say here.
$1 million.
$1 million.
To find wealth, I mean there is something, I you know, wealth is like the default is money, and I there is part of me that works toward, like we have our daughter who's a year and a half now, and we have this home that we, you know, pay all the stuff on, and the cost of living keeps increasing. And so there is something about like, how can I have the things that I'm learning and the plant material itself be able to generate explicitly revenue, like, you know, dollars. um but certainly isn't the primary driver. But having, it's just like with all of our, like I want to grow enough potatoes that we have more potatoes than we explicitly need going to the spring, because then we can like replant them, we can do other, we can reinvest those potatoes, or we can share them with others if they're in need. And I see financial resource, which is wealth, you know, it's one part of the facet of wealth, being a currency, like currency, like the literal, like the base of that, of current, of like the flow. And like I think of water as wealth, and I think of soil as wealth. um and I think it's easy to get into a thing of like, well, we shouldn't think about money at all. Like I think it's
Mhm.
important while this exists, like if you can generate any sort of buffer financially, there's value in that. And then huge part of all of our work is establishing barter and gift economy relationships with people in our community, so that the need for explicit money stuff is ever declining within our community. So the deepest wealth, I think, is like the plant systems, and then the relationships with folks within our community, of like all the different things we need that don't require any little rectangular pieces of paper with frumpy frumpy guys.
Right.
every, there's none of them that are smiling. Have you noticed that? There's no like 5, 10, there's no denomination where they're like they're all like
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to not having those guys in
There
my
you go. Yeah.
office. Just seeds.
Yeah. Very nice. Very nice. I think we'll skip this one. This is kind of another playful slide here. This one, I've wanted to pick your brain about this one for a while. There is a slide I had on community though, and we've got 8 minutes.
It's, I'm not tight on it. It's, you know, if it takes longer, that's fine.
Okay. Well, yeah, if you don't mind, I would like to kind of chat a little bit about invasive species. So I will say that this is not meant to be an inquisition here. I plant plenty of invasive species. I've got black locust is considered invasive here. I planted autumn olive here. I don't tell anyone, but I've actually planted kudzu,
Mm.
which I think here in dry California is a much less of a concern than in the humid, hot south.
Mhm.
Like legumes here, they just don't really grow like they do in a warm environment. Like I grew up in the Central Valley of California. It's hot, like 100, 105, 110 degrees is relatively common over the summer. And everything just like explodes in growth over there. Here on the coast, it's 70 degrees every single day.
Mm.
And like my bean plants, they get this tall. They're productive, but they get to be this tall. So I grew black-eyed peas, and I'm thinking the peas are just going to, grow and take over, and they're going to be amazing and glorious. And the black-eyed peas were this tall because it's just that cool climate. So I don't think the kudzu is really as crazy as it may sound. So anyway, so I do plant invasive species. So what I notice in your channel is that you do plant invasives, and I think if I read the situation correctly, it seems like there's inherently sort of like a defensiveness that is just kind of like it has to be there because the comments are coming type of thing, right? And I don't feel like I've gotten to kind of like hear your complete thoughts about invasive species because I feel like you always kind of have to justify it in the video and it doesn't make room for much nuance, right?
Mhm.
So tell me your take on invasive species and um, where are you on the introduction of invasive species? How do you think about that? What what in your mind gives you the green light and what's something that you would shy away from? Um, Go ahead and just run with that.
Well, I think the first thing I would say is I I I'll use the word invasive only as a starting point because that's the language that everyone uses. And then my goal, it every time I hear the word invasive, it kind of like ugh, it feels gross in me. And so I think my thing I would say is like I just reject the word and what it draws up into the mind and into the body about a living being to say invasive as the starting point. Um, I think in just foundationally, uh, being a non-native, I mean, quote unquote, like I'm an invasive, you're an invasive. Like if we want to use that language technically accurately, but there's an ugliness within it, and I think it facilitates disdain and like violence against beings very easily. People in the far right would use the word invasive to describe people of Mexican and Guatemalan descent or Honduran descent coming into the country illegal invasives, and I I just think there's a lack of uh, there's a lack of depth and richness that could be accessed in discussing plants that are recent arrivals versus plants that have been here a long time versus plants that we haven't even seen in this context yet, et cetera, et cetera. And to my mind, in the realm of human beings, I'm interested in meeting anyone, no matter where they come from and what they're up to, and trying to suss out whether or not they can be allies and that they have good intention and they try to like operate from a potent place. And I'm interested the same way in plants and the same way in insects and creatures and animals. And I recognize that plants in particular have a very different time scale than we do. So what's happening over the course of a year or 5 years might be a very small gesture in what the ecosystem is doing with those plants. And it seems like a very like wooey blah 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 way to say it, but I'm most interested. I don't want to know, I don't necessarily care to know the name of the plant right out of the gate, or is it native or non-native. I want to hear first attributes and like ecosystem services and behaviors and what are the things that are positive in a given ecosystem, what are the things that are antagonistic. And so like for example, um, Jerusalem artichoke is explicitly a native plant that I have a huge amount of respect for and appreciate. And I probably have some of the highest level of reservation in planting them in a lot of contexts as native plants because they're not invasive, they're expansive, and they're very persistent, they're indelible, and they're like disruptive of diversity within a space. Autumn Olive is a character that's extremely compelling to me. And yes, it's invasive, blah blah blah, but there's extreme capacity in its ability to hold the space in like profoundly disrupted and abused contexts. And I find that it is not expansive or invasive unless you continue to manifest an abused landscape around it. Like you continue to till, you continue to strip, you continue to clear cut, then autumn olive is invasive. So there's way more nuance with all this. Like European buckthorn is a plant. I would never plant them explicitly, but I have immense respect for what it does in conditioning anoxic, tight, clay, waterlogged soils in our area. And I am excited to segue a context away from European buckthorn when I meet them, but not with anger and hate because they're illegal, invasive. They're there. They've done some work. I want to start facilitating more decompaction and more soil building, and who's next? Can they be native, non-native, but like more complexity within the ecosystem? So yeah, I've gone to native plant society meetings where they talked about, what chemicals are reasonable to use to kill these illegals. And then at the back of the meeting, there's apple juice, which is like from trees that aren't native, that are grown with conventional destructive practices with sprays and all that. There's Oreos, which are like wheat and corn and soy based, which are all non-native and they are not implicitly destructive, but the management and the growth of them is explicitly destructive. Everyone got there in cars, which are destructive. And so it's like, what are we doing, folks? Like who I want to hang out with allies, and I consider plants, animals, and all creatures, people to be allies first and foremost. And my ire and my like concern and my disdain is more for extractive class and like big capitalist systems, military industrial complex, pharmaceutical complex, financial stuff. Those are the things that actually feel like we need to fight and figure out what our strategies are. And like everybody else down on the ground, I think are allies that we just have to know how to work with them, contain the really ebullient, crazy ones a bit, but still work with them and appreciate them, and then facilitate the ones that are like, they've been here a long time, but the land's changed and it's been abused and it's hard for lady slippers and trilliums to do their thing. So like, let's make sure we also really nourish the context for those crew to have a chance too. But we're in a straight up full on emergency on all levels. And so all plants, all people are allies until very much empirically proven otherwise for me. That's my long spiel on invasives. I reject the term. It stops the conversation in a way that's like, not that there's a flatness to it, and sometimes like an ugliness that lives within the sound of that word, how it comes out of people's mouths. So I want more nuance in what we're going to say about everybody.
Interesting, very interesting. Yeah. I feel like so in introducing plants that are known to be aggressive, just kind of moving away from the word invasive for a moment. So introducing aggressive plants is largely a question of management, right? And if you kind of know what you're getting into, then I think it's the dynamic is very different. If you know what you're getting into, you're disciplined about it, right? And the thing that kind of gives me misgivings there is that, if I were to bop off tomorrow and I've got these invasives that are growing and nobody else is managing them, then I've set something in motion that without that management, now it's starting to take on some of those unsavory dynamics. But I think I tend to be on a similar page with you, right? But yeah, that sort of like, that's the way I think of it in my own mind, is it's a question of management. It's just, I've never really gotten over that whole, what happens when the manager is no longer there side of things,
Yeah, I mean, there are easy solutions to that concern. Like, I think of the example of autumn olive, and like, yeah, if if spread by birds to novel contexts that are in abused regime, like it's like their ability to gain traction is predicated on abuse almost exclusively. Like you don't see autumn olive seed land in like 100-year-old sugar maple grove on sweet soils that haven't been hit by modern people at all, or like old growth forests. They just don't gain traction. There's some minor like low nitrogen context open glade stuff. Like there's some rarities, but by and large, it only will take over abused areas. But even still, if there's any concern there, great. Don't introduce a plant like that. Find an analog and say like, well, gumi is a sweet analog for me. I'll put that in. Like they don't spread by seed nearly as well. Or maybe I'll just skip the idea of a nitrogen fixing shrub and say I'm interested in, elderberry or serviceberry or somebody in that realm that like can also spread by seed. I mean, elderberry spreads by seed really aggressively in our landscape because they like the rich soil. Um, but there's always analogs, and sometimes there aren't explicitly native analogs to the particular set of 6 criteria you're trying to check that like a non-native can do. So then have 2 or 3 different natives work together to meet that purpose. And I think there's a ton of value in weighing most of your plantings, maybe all, if that's what somebody wants to do, that's great. But I try to weigh the vast majority of my plantings towards native plants because I think there is just more foundational resilience there, and there's more respect for like the other beings that are in the butterflies and the bees and the ants and all the different things that have co-evolved with those. But I can't get too deep into like you cannot do this, you can't do, because like this, what about apples, man? You plant apples are everywhere. They just happen to have way more of an economic lobby keeping the word invasive off them as an attribution. And so then there's a disingenuous aspect to it. Like if it can make a bunch of money for somebody, it's never going to be invasive, even though like that's the majority of agriculture in this country is non-native species that are doing stuff. So but that, yeah, like people easily take my comments on this and say, oh, you hate natives, and I'm like, whoa, that's craziness. I think native people, native plants are amazing. And I just one last thing on it, I've spoken a bunch with folks from the Tuscarora clan, which are first people further west of where I live, like which is now Buffalo area, and people from Cayuga Nation, which is a little north of where we are, and asked them about different like non-native plants. And they're across the board, they're like their collectives now at the reservations are interested in working with, like they work with autumn olive extensively. They're like, yeah, we process it, we make fruit leathers, we turn it into firewood, the flowers are beautiful. Like they like that plant because it's challenging and also has lots of food and medicine value, and they can plant trees in association with them. So not that they're planting them, but that they showed up, they're trying to work with this new person, this new being who arrived, and trying to do their best with it. So I if native people are down with non-native beings, then I would like to be too.
Fascinating. Let's look at this one just real quick, like just a one-liner.
um I don't, I mean, I spent a lot of time on YouTube just like watching silly stuff. I tend to not sit and watch like really all these intense gardening channels and blah blah. Like I don't know, right now it's not a guilty pleasure. Like I'm just very interested in understanding quite a bit more about solar energy and battery backup systems, and like trying to figure out decoupling and like repurposing stuff. So I watched this guy Will Prouse, who's kind of like a popular solar slash wiring person that
I watch a lot of him as well. I'm actually building a system right now. This is my little like office shed. I'm building a system. I got a Nissan Leaf about a year and a half ago, and I'm building a system to be able to charge off grid. I've got all the equipment's ready to go. I just need to I need a crimper for my lugs and stuff like that. But yeah, Will Prouse, I'm a big fan.
yeah, I mean it's that kind of stuff I think would be a surprise. Like that's more of a surprise, and I don't feel any guilty. It's like I'm just trying to learn some stuff. It's fine.
Yeah.
um and Yeah, other than that, like I don't know, I tend to watch stuff that like is a little bit mindless because I think in my day-to-day the work that I do, I don't think I'm explicitly thinking, but there's like a lot of stuff going on as far as like the processing of things. So I tend to watch like doofy comedy things and like people doing cool tricks, just like
Yeah.
like relaxed stuff.
Yeah.
So
The one my guilty pleasure is I watch Cole the Corn Star. I'm not sure if he's ever popped up in your feed, but he's a great big like, industrial farming guy, so he was born into industrial farming. He's a 27-year-old kid basically, and he's grown up in industrial farming and he started doing the whole like vlogging his farming lifestyle. And I've watched him now for 6 straight years and I don't think I've missed a single episode
wow.
of this guy. Yeah.
And he's talking about like conventional ag stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I've learned a lot.
Huh.
The systems are fascinating. Wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. I mean, they're in debt up to their earballs and or
Mhm.
their eyeballs rather, and they're literally just like year by year, okay, can we keep the lights on this year? Can we keep the lights on this year? And it's
Mm.
like, I don't know why anyone would subject themselves to that lifestyle, but
Yeah, that's big ag. I mean, that's small
yeah.
ag too for a lot of people, but
Mhm.
yeah, I think we're learning pretty quickly now with the new administration and like the rug getting pulled out for a lot of USDA
Mhm.
stuff. Like a lot of people with equip and NRCS grants where like they bought the solar stuff or they bought the high tunnel and then now they need the funding back and the government's like, no, we're not going to like there's just reminders every few units of time, depending on how closely you're looking at that, remind you like, yeah, you need to figure it out on your own with your family, with your community, with your people, not
Correct.
with like with the we can't really depend on subsidies or like those sorts of investments and grants. I I've been interested in the past, like, oh, maybe we build like a high tunnel and get an NRCS grant and get it for free or whatever. And I'm always like, that just feels it feels sketchy and it feels like which presenting it's the rawness of it is presenting itself more and more that being in debt to big institutions is a frightening way to live and the sooner
Mhm.
you can make your costs so tiny that you just can like stay in the black just the tiniest bit all the time and that's good enough is that's it.
Yeah, you're miles and miles ahead a lot of people in agriculture. If you're in the black every year, even by a little bit, you're miles ahead.
Yeah, it's we've only we've only made a tiny bit, it's a little bit more each year but it's not a lot, but it's like we it work every year financially. Our farm has worked since we started it, and without taking out loans or without any debt or without big equipment and that kind. And it really is about like keeping it small. Like, okay, I need season extension. Before you do the $20,000 high tunnel, you build low tunnels to put over your 4 foot by 20 foot beds for $100, and you do that for. Did it do it? Yes, could. Then you're done. No, maybe. What about a cattle panel high? And then only then do you think about rather than like, if only I got the $30,000 tractor, then I could
Mhm.
start a nursery. Is just like, Brent, that's tough. It's not going to work for you.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll make this the last one here. I think this is one you could probably spend a lot of time on. So, feel free to dial it up or dial it down, however time permits. In both your channel and in real life, so to speak. You show a strong commitment to building community. And I'm just kind of like wondering where the motivation for that comes from. Because I mean, you spend a lot of your life responding to random people on the internet, and that amount of time that you dedicate to your channel, I think, is remarkable because um, it has gone a long way toward building a community in your
Mhm.
channel. But at the same time, I don't know how much you're really getting out of all the time that you've spent
Hmm.
in that effort, right? And so I wonder what the motivation is, right? So I have, and it may be none of these, right? So is it altruistic? Do you find that it's mutually beneficial? Do you find that it's self-serving, or is there something else or some other constellation of different things that motivate you in this community development, both
Hmm.
online and in real life?
That's it's interesting. I think it's all of those things. There, which is weird because it feels like they'd be in opposition, but somehow it's like they can all somehow. Okay, so there's this T-shirt my mom gave me when I was 12. That's a Keith Haring, who's a cool artist back in the 80s. Um, and it has somebody holding another person up over a dog, and it says, the quote is, it is in your self-interest to find a way to be very tender. And that's been in me so strong for my whole life, that like it it isn't expensive or extractive. Like, it does take time, like with the channel, to use that as the example. Like, I try to respond to every single comment. I don't always, but like, try to. And so it's, 20,000 a year or something. So I don't know, some number that's big. And but I'm organized with it. And like, I sit down to coffee, I give myself 15 minutes here and 15 minutes in the evening. Like, this takes a half hour a day or whatever it takes. And if I look at the ad revenue for the day, I'm earning at least a living wage to do that. And for me as a farmer, a living wage that's higher than what I make when I run my farm. Like, I probably, if I really accounted for all the time, it's like somewhere between $10 and $15 an hour is what I make for being a farmer, for hard physical labor. And so if I'm making like $20 or $22 an hour for responding to every single comment, then it's, that's self-serving. Like, I can say it's self-serving. I can also say it's ultra, because I think there's something sweet. Like, when I write a comment on some channel about, like, I ask a question, or like, I really like what you're up to, it's, to me, it's like a deep surprise when anybody ever responds, because it feels like it's just like a black hole, like it goes away. So it feels like, oh, that might feel really sweet for random people to say, to know that I'm seeing, and not just putting a heart on it, but like I'm writing back to them. And I think there's mutual benefit, because then they feel like they're actually part of something, because they are. Like, I really actually appreciate all the people. I think it just meets all the things to engage with the virtual community, so to speak, and not just take it for granted. Cool.
But I'll go ahead and let you go here. And I really appreciate you coming on and chatting with me. Any last words, any last thoughts or comments?
No, this was interesting to do and get, to have the, now I'm stumbling because I'm not sure. Okay, I can hear you. No, I appreciate having the opportunity to answer some of these questions. There are a lot of like compelling and challenging, interesting questions within there. I'm hopeful that this works for you, that it turns into like a video that is of value or has some use for what your goals are. And I'd like to see, maybe when you post it, can you share the link to me so I can see it? And I wonder if there's a possibility, it's up to you if you want to do this, but maybe you could share a link to the actual edited video when it's all done. And if it feels like a good fit, maybe I can post it on my YouTube channel as well, because I think the viewers on my channel might be interested, and I'd be very happy to have it be, to refer it back to your channel and encourage people to check out other things you're up to. I just reacquainted myself with your channel, and I want to like go through and check out some of the other videos. I see we had that email exchange like 2 years ago or so, and so it's gonna be neat to like go back and see. I want to learn more about what you're up to, Brian.
Yeah, very cool. And then, yeah, that would be great if you want to share it. I feel like some of the questions were awkward, but hopefully compelling at the same time. Like, it's very idiosyncratic, right? Because it's just things that I've been curious about. But yeah, if you think that some other people would find this interesting, that would be great. And then I'd love to have some more people kind of checking out some of the projects I'm working on. Absolutely.
Yeah.